Well, welcome, guys. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
No worries. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so just talking. We're going to start on your careers and how you got to being on this stage today and the work that you currently do. Then we're going to talk through some challenges that you've had around digital transformation, customer experience, loyalty, and those sorts of things. Then we'll be throwing to the audience for questions as well. So just feel free to write them down, and we'll have some time dedicated at the end for Q&A. But we might just start off with just some quick introductions from yourself. Falaka, you're next to me here. So maybe if you could just tell everyone here, I know you're a Chicago native and you've been on the West Coast for a while, but you're back.
Yes. Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Falaka Dosu. As Russ mentioned, I'm from Chicago and I work at the Walt Disney Company, and specifically under the DMED organization, which houses all the media that many fans have come to know and love over the years. I started off, I can kind of go back maybe to the college years. I studied science, technology, and society at Stanford and graduated in 2011. Really interested in startups. You can imagine the atmosphere in Silicon Valley at the time would lend itself to that. So I did that. But I was very stubborn, actually. I wanted to come back home to Chicago and do that at that time. There were a lot of emerging tech companies as well, especially more on the consumer side, which is where I wanted to focus, and specifically e-commerce. So I worked in Chicago for a while. For a little bit, I did kind of smaller, kind of contract jobs. I did one job that was really fun, where I worked with an organization called Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative and helped them start an e-commerce presence with their artisanal wares. After that, I worked at a startup that's since been acquired called apesmarket.com, and that focused on selling natural organic products, and it was a marketplace style. So that was also a fun opportunity as well. And then I worked at a fintech startup before realizing that I wanted to have a bit more versatility as far as a marketer and the types of experiences that I'd have. So I went to business school. So I attended Berkeley Haas for my MBA. And during that time, I realized that I really loved talking about entertainment stuff and creative stuff, and wanted to pursue a more creative path in that way. So I started working at Disney not too long after I graduated and have been there since 2019. A lot has happened at Disney since. When I joined, it was right before the Fox integration went through, and it was right the same year that the Disney Plus would later launch. So a lot of momentous stuff has happened.
Yeah.
And then, of course, COVID being very momentous for all of us. So really excited to be here today and share more about what I've learned as far as engaging consumers and really thinking about them as fans.
Super cool. Thanks, Falaka. A question without notice. Ride of a lifetime. Is that something that internally people at Disney have read and connect with? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. Ride of a lifetime for anyone, I'm sure everyone knows, but Bob Iger, the biography, and talks through a lot of that transformation, which I'm sure we'll get into a bit more detail. Todd, talk to us. So you've lived in Chicago previously. You're back here now. You've been here for a few years. Can you tell us a bit about your career?
Yeah, my tour of Chicago began before the internet, and now I'm back here. I grew up in the pre-digital age in Ohio. I didn't know anything about anything, so least of all thinking that I would become a chief experience officer, because that title just did not exist when I was growing up. And my career has got really three tours of duty, so to speak, that I think make up what experience is today. The first part of that is in marketing. I worked at Procter & Gamble, and I worked at Leo Burnett, which is a big agency here in town. Then I went, according to my boss at the time, I made the worst career mistake of my life, and I went to this fledgling organization called America Online, which is what it was called in its time, and worked in the early days of the internet. And from then I spent a big chunk of time in New York at different digital media firms, places like Lifetime Television, Time Inc., before the third phase of my career, which I'll call digital marketing and digital commerce, which oddly began in the horse racing arena. Who watched the Kentucky Derby this weekend? That was like the Super Bowl of horse racing, for those of you who know nothing about horse racing, which is pretty much everyone. But that was an exciting time for me, and it was the first foray into selling digital subscriptions for data, running a betting platform and doing stuff like that. I'd never done anything like that, still don't understand how to bet. But similar mechanics that landed me in the role right now of Chief Experience Officer at the American Medical Association, where I run membership, digital marketing, digital publishing, customer service, all in service of the doctors, residents, medical students out there, and the patients that they serve.
Very cool. That's a really broad experience too. Like especially, I met someone last week who worked for Procter & Gamble a long time ago and worked on the Always product, and he had some funny stories just around the segmenting of the market and the like. So, but you've worked across agency side, brand side.
I would say the number one thing that I learned in that first phase of my career is segmentation, and I've never forgotten it, and I do it every time I start a job. So thank you, Procter & Gamble and Leo Burnett. Yeah,
excellent. What was, just while we're with you, Todd, what was your first ever job or your first ever like foray into marketing where you thought, okay, that's a path that I connect with?
I had no idea what I wanted to do. If you grew up when I did and you were in college, I don't want to say when it was, all you wanted to do was make money. That was like the zeitgeist out there. But then I realized I didn't want to work for a bank, and instead Procter & Gamble came to campus, and there was I'll never forget the video of Walter Solomon, who's still out there somewhere, talking about how he dropped a $1 coupon for Ivory shampoo, and it was the biggest thing ever. And I was like, oh my God, you can do that? That was how I ended up at Procter & Gamble. And so that was my first job. I worked on Scope mouthwash. I worked on all sorts of things, Metamucil and Paradex oral rinse and all this stuff. And that's where you kind of learn that it doesn't have to be like a super sexy product to learn how to get close to a customer and to get excited about your business. In fact, I think one of the things I've learned is like the sexier the business seems on the outside, the actual worse it is to work on it. And so the fun is to find really cool brands out there you can grow.
Find the sexy in it.
Stay away from sexy.
Yeah. Falake, so tell us about I'd love to know what your first ever job was, whether it was marketing or not related, and if there was something from that job which either set you on a path or that you still think about today.
Yeah, so in my case, I would say my job at avesmarket.com was probably the first conventional marketing job I had. And because we were a startup, I did both marketing and merchandising. Mm-hmm. And I think the merchandising part is really interesting as far as being an online merchandiser, because it gives you practice, as you mentioned, with segmentation, to really think about how to really position the different offerings. At that time, natural and organic was still like a little bit crunchy, granola seeming. It wasn't quite as common parlance as it is now. So it was really interesting figuring out different ways to communicate to those audiences, both the people who are like hardcore grew everything at home types, but then also people who are like, maybe I'll give this a try, or I think I read somewhere that maybe people should avoid certain ingredients or not. So it was a really fun environment. It was a startup, so learned a lot on the job, and I actually still stay in touch with a lot of people from that team, and who since have gone on to do a lot of different things, and we all agree that it was a really great formative learning experience. So I had to try a lot of products, and it's been really amazing seeing some of those brands that were just starting out now being huge consumer brands now. So that's also really rewarding and exciting. That's
super cool. So what does in your current job, like what's a sort of day in the life? Like you rock up so are you working remotely?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So what does that look like? Get up and then sort of through the day, like are we talking meetings? How's it work?
Yeah, as you can imagine, at a company as large and complex as Disney, there's a lot of meetings to make sure that we're all, on the same page and aligned. Mm-hmm. So definitely a lot of meetings, a lot of planning, a lot of orienting our team's priorities around larger enterprise priorities. So that's always exciting. So for example, it's actually really interesting that you led us in the Pacific Islander dance, because we've been working on stuff, for example, for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So figuring out ways we can prioritize certain titles, create new content to support that, and really make our fans seen. And I should also add, so I specifically lead our movie loyalty program or one of the leaders behind the movie loyalty program, and it's called Disney Movie Insider. So I actually have some questions for the audience too. Yeah. Any favorite Disney movies? Just shout them out.
Moana.
Lion King fans? Okay, here, Moana. What else? Anyone see Doctor Strange this past weekend? Not yet? Okay. So if you're a Disney Movie Insiders member, what you can do is when you sign up, you can earn points for watching movies like this in theaters. So you'd be able to earn points, especially opening weekend double points. But anyway, you earn points for your movie consumption. So so a lot of what I've been doing lately has been working to support Doctor Strange, for example, but we're always looking at different titles. and always looking at different initiatives as well. So, for example, May the 4th just happened, which anyone know about May the 4th?
Yeah.
Exactly. So Star Wars Day. So we did a lot of stuff around that as well. So yeah, so the day in life is mostly looking at how are we laddering up to larger enterprise priorities and making sure that our members are a part of that action. They're Disney best guests, super passionate Disney fans, or they wouldn't be in the program.
Yep.
And also just making sure we're supporting things in window for different titles.
Excellent. Todd,
she's glad that you haven't seen Doctor Strange, because my daughter called me. She said, Benedict Cumberbatch looks so much like you that it's eerie. And I was like, don't tell me that. I do not like that comparison.
Have you heard that before?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I won't say.
Yeah, so anyway.
Yeah.
Cosplay gig for you.
Okay. Does it pay well? Okay. All right. So for me, experience constitutes really what I call seamless integration of marketing and product and commerce and service. And for me at the AMA, that means 3 metrics: membership growth, audience growth, and making sure that our brand remains strong, and that at the end of the year, people take away physicians, powerful ally, and patient care. So every day is about orchestrating a series of events, product launches, initiatives that reinforce those 3 things. I have up on my little whiteboard. I had to erase that after 2 years. I couldn't make out what heads or tails of what was on that from before the pandemic. But I have the 4 things that I work on, and I just keep my team focused on those things every day. So the experience today is about anticipating and removing the friction that sits in a funnel. Funnel is very different than when I first started here. First started in marketing. It's no longer that kind of elegant tiptoeing through awareness all the way to purchase and loyalty. It's a 10-second customer journey. And so today, you think about the decisions you make when you land on something on Instagram or whatever, TikTok or whatever it is. You barely even knew you needed something. You probably said it out loud. You got served it up in an ad, and all of a sudden, 10 seconds later, you're on a trip to France. I mean, these are the complexity of decisions that can be made in relatively little amount of time if that journey is set up for you to be able to execute it. And so my job is to execute journeys for people like that and make sure that they start at the beginning, understanding what we do as an organization for them. And in this world, like, a membership is not like, a pair of shoes. You can't touch it. It's hard to know, like, whether something feels like it's worth it. But are you going to pay $420 a year to become part of the AMA? You better feel like it represents your values and is going to do a job for you. And so it starts at that need and continues all the way down through having kind of a repetitive experience with the AMA that reinforces that belief. You go through the digital marketing funnel with our kind of targeted advertising, the way that we talk to both members and non-members. Go through the commerce funnel that has to be as good as an experience as Amazon for people to make their way through that. And then the work doesn't stop once they sign up. You got to work immediately in the retention then, and to make sure that at the end of that year, they're ready to re-sign with you and that you've delivered value. So my job is about value and making sure that people know the great work that we're doing and feel it every day.
I think so interesting, Todd, what you just mentioned then, like, you're both from very different businesses, but they're membership-based, and your roles are very, very strong around membership growth, retention, enriching that membership experience. But also just bringing Amazon into the equation. When we talk about customer experience, you're not just looking at what are the other similar products to me and how are they delivering on that experience. Like, there is a more sort of broader, overarching customer experience that everyone is expecting now, no matter what the product is. And it's interesting that, we can talk about different sorts of brands that sit right outside the realm. And now I feel like if we had had this conversation 3 or 4 years ago, someone mentioning Amazon when they're at a different type of business, people would be like, there's a disconnect there. But it feels like to me that customer experience, that understanding the customer experience is a consistent thing across all brands and all products, is more accepted these days. Is that something you'd kind of agree with?
Well, I will tell you, 5 years ago, when I got a job as Chief Experience Officer, I had to look it up to figure out what it was I was supposed to be doing. Yeah. And there was no great definition for customer experience out there. I think it's changed so much. I had to write a definition. I wrote what I kind of just blurted out there a few minutes ago. Nobody knew what it was or how to define it. And in a world where you do have a 10-second customer journey, the job of a chief experience officer or of experience is so much different than it was 5 years ago. But it has been said.
Yeah.
That bar, like my daughter was looking at like a blender. She's like, I can have a blender in 4 hours. They'll deliver it between 4 and 8 a.m. And I was like, that is very different than the world. And think about all the things that go into figuring out what that decision is, where you buy that blender, how you make your decision, where you execute, and all along the way through the delivery and beyond. So it's a different ballgame out there.
For sure. Falake, we sort of said we'd get into the digital transformation piece and some of the things that you guys have done within your businesses. And I know the loyalty program specifically at Disney has gone through a huge change from, you guys don't call it the noughties here, do you? The 2000s. That's an Australian thing, is it?
No.
The aughts. Okay, cool. The aughts through to
I think
the late
the knots were the 80s.
Ah,
I'm just
okay.
kidding. That was a joke.
So, Falake, can you talk to us about the loyalty and some of the evolution there?
Sure. So Disney Movie Insiders actually launched in 2006, but as Disney Movie Rewards. And the chief utility of the program at that time was, imagine buying a DVD, just in general, imagine buying a DVD and from our vantage point, we're distributing the DVDs to all the different distributors who are then selling it. We don't have that data. So the program arose from the needs, from the desire also really to have that data. So the main way that people would sign up is that they would see the insert in a DVD and then later Blu-rays to say, like, you can earn this many points because you made this purchase, sign up for the program. And so that was how the program really started, was to support that in-home window. And as you can imagine, since 2006, there's a lot of different ways that media consumption has changed since then, especially around movies. So it was really imperative for the program to evolve in a way where we're able to speak to and reward our fans, our members, just like around all the different ways they like to experience movies. And really just think of it less as a transactional piece and thinking about it more as an experience and how you feel. So you can imagine these are fans we're talking about. So they really care about storytelling. They care about access. They care about exclusivity. They care about pins. If you're familiar with the whole Disney pin phenomenon, they care about things like that really add something special and show that we recognize them and appreciate them as fans. So the program is really involved. Todd, you mentioned how your roles named, like as far as Chief Experience Officer, is pretty nascent. In our case, we added the word member experience to the descriptor of our rewards lead, because we really wanted to make sure that we were crafting like a really thoughtful member experience. So now members can earn points from linking their accounts with our different theatrical ticketing partners, so it's more seamless. We now have an app to make it easier as well. So if you buy a paper ticket, you can scan the ticket and get points that way. The types of rewards we offer are different too. Like there's a lot of physical rewards that we have, so things like pins and other collectibles, posters are really popular. But we also offer experiences, so someone can save up enough points to go on a studio tour, which is amazing. It's a tour the studio lot, and we wouldn't be able to do that otherwise as someone as a member of the public at large. So a lot of it is really thinking about how do we really plus up that member experience and that fan experience. And that's why our tagline is where fans become insiders. Like, how do we make them really feel like they're a part of that? And in our case, our program sign up is free. But then in a lot of ways, it adds even more of, okay, why should I sign up? As far as what am I getting from this program that I'm not getting elsewhere? And that's what we really want to lead into the ideas of insider access, of value, because another popular reward is movie ticket vouchers. So you can use your points from watching movies to just get a ticket through Adam, for example, to get a ticket to the movies. So, yeah.
Excellent. Todd, we've spoken in terms of our user experience, our customer experience, removing friction, making it seamless, that sort of thing. But when you're trying to build these initiatives in-house, and you mentioned before when we were talking that there was no CXO before, and you have really had to come in, and you've come from a business which was it mail-based subscription previously, and you're moving to that sort of online commerce. How do you get that buy-in from the stakeholders within your business? Like what sort of strategies are you using to be able to push your initiatives through?
It's interesting because one a thing I never expected is to work 2 jobs in a row where my organization before this was 125 years old, and the AMA is 175 years old this year. So these are both, they were both organizations that have been around for a very, very long time and still remaining relevant. The key thing I learned in my first kind of gig with that was not to go in and like spout off all about digital transformation. Just figure out how to make things grow.
Yep.
So when I walked in the door, I think I had exactly 1 week before my boss asked me, like, will you just talk to everybody about what your plan is? I'm like, well, I literally have had 4 days here. But I learned so much in a totally different context. I mean, what does horse racing have in common with medicine? Absolutely nothing, except the mechanics underneath it are the same. And so what I laid out in that kind of just after 1 week became a roadmap that I followed for 5 years. And so you can make those kind of general observations about what the growth levers are. After you've been on enough kind of businesses, you can kind of just see those patterns. And then you just kind of talk to people about growth and specific initiatives. And maybe, 5 years from now, when you've been really, really successful, then you can talk about digital transformation. It sounds very highfalutin. I thought I was like really clever by saying never talk about digital transformation, but I was reading a book last night and there was like a person who said the very same thing. So it's clearly not an original thought, but the way that we talk are about growth initiatives and very contained. And so where you can learn from an experiment, say with starting an email program and learning or teaching people how to do email testing, things like that, and then people get very excited when you can make 40% increases over something else. And then enough of those like little wins, and then it becomes a trend, and then people start to believe. And so I've learned to enroll people in the small wins along the way, and then that gives you permission to do bigger things. Yep.
It's so interesting that it can be a scary word to like, I'm head of digital transformation, or we're going to digitally transform this business. It's probably a lot of people who'd see potentially, how does that affect my role? How does it affect me? How does it affect my business unit? The panel we did in New York, we had Stephen Clark from Golden Crust. And when I asked him the same question, he's like, I would never use that word because it would scare so many people.
He got that from me.
Yeah, he got it from you, Todd.
Yeah.
So he basically said he had to hijack his way in with, just like you said, little initiatives where you get a win and you're building that credibility, little win after little win. And then it's more like it's in the rearview mirror that, oh, look how we've digitally transformed over the past 2 years, kind of by stealth. So it's interesting that that's a consistent sort of viewpoint across a few different industries.
And it's funny because I came from a publishing firm in a very different space. I mean, Kentucky Derby, again, that's like, woohoo, we're all over that.
Yeah.
When I got to the AMA, there wasn't really a digital publishing operation of the kind that you need in today's environment, especially where you can connect content and commerce, right? That is where a lot of the action is. And so just to be able to bring that experience to the table, and again, it's not inexpensive. And so to be able to work your way into a large scale publishing operation where now our traffic is up by almost 8 times what it was 5 years ago. And you think about who would have known a pandemic was going to come along when that would be so important to be able to serve people, fight misinformation, help doctors through probably what was the toughest time in recent history. So pretty exciting.
Cool. Falake, so what's your North Star? What are your measurable metrics that you're working towards in your role?
Yes, that's a great question. For us, we love to be able to demonstrate incremental growth and spend from our Disney Best Guests, many of whom are our members. So I'd love to see any increase in movies registered, whether it's movie tickets registered or like in-home movies registered as well. So that's always exciting to see. But really, I love to see the engagement of fans, the chatter. It's really fun to be able to have this role where I'm able to see our member profiles grow and really bring that CRM kind of mentality to a business that's largely impressions based, right?
Yeah.
Being able to demonstrate that this is how we serve our super fans, and being able to explain that these fans are at a whole other level, and knowing that we're doing what we're doing to make them happy. That's what I'd love to see. But yeah, definitely love to see engagement in the program. As you mentioned, COVID transforming your work, which I can really imagine that doing at the AMA. In our case, it caused us to think about things differently. As you can imagine, movie theaters were shut down. The primary ways that people would earn points in turn also evaporated. So our ways of adapting were to figure out where are other ways, we have a points-based program, what are other ways that we can reward engagement that aren't as dependent on purchase activity to keep us afloat basically in that interim period now that movies are back in effect. So we offer points for, if you download the app, you can get points that way. Or for our different heritage months, every week we'd have a different bonus code that would relate. So for example, with Women's Heritage Month, or Women's History Month rather, we offered points, and each of the points were named after a Disney legend who was a woman, right? So we found ways to keep people engaged and have them feel appreciated when there was not as many movies available. So I think part of it is also just figuring out how to meet people where they are and to listen. We have the benefit of very vocal fans. So we know what our fans are saying. They have their Facebook groups, they have their subreddits. They will reach out to our care teams directly. They let us know how they feel. And it's been really great to be able to act on that and see the impact firsthand.
Yep. Todd, are your members, so your members are doctors and people studying to be doctors.
Yep.
Are they vocal about changes that they like made within the AMA? Like, how does that go from your perspective?
So it depends on the person. I think when I got to the AMA, a lot of people were like, they just kind of talk about doctors or medical students, and just like everybody else, people are really different. And so one of the key things we did was try to understand what kind of brought them to the table. So there are a lot of people we would call advocates who are very vocal about changing medicine. Equity is a huge consideration right now in medicine. We're very active in that space. We have a large group of people that come to our annual meeting here in Chicago, and they work on health policy. But then there was another group of people that are mainly interested in the science, and then there's another group that are interested in how to make their practices better. And so that was a huge thing to understand about the audiences. They're not the same. They're not going to engage with you on the same things. It changed everything about how we talk to them and market to them. And so that, again, segmentation's back at it. So that's the fun piece of the puzzle.
Interesting. I'd love to talk about the daily interview. It's moved to weekly now. Is that right?
One of the pandemic inventions, when we needed to reach doctors and we needed to reach people with more information, is we basically invented our own video program, which at the time was called the COVID-19 Update. And I started that from literally between the wall and my bed. And we didn't really have a host. And so I said, I'll host. And it's turned out to be an everyday side gig for me for 2 years now. We've shifted from doing a daily COVID-19 update into what we call moving medicine. But over the past 2 years, I've gotten to talk to basically a doctor or two a day. And if you want to talk about getting to know your customer and understanding what they're going through, that's how you become customer-centric. To truly understand what people have gone through in the past 2 years, especially people in medicine, whether you're a doctor, a resident, a student, understand what their lives are like, how you can impact them, giving them a platform to talk about what their lives are like and what they're going through. Sometimes like in your career, you have to give yourself permission to like try something really new like that. And then you're like, hey, I've got this platform. I can almost talk to anybody that I want. So you can talk to the most famous doctors in the United States. People from the White House want to be on our program. It's a different thing than I ever thought I would be doing. And I just recorded a segment today in our new studio. So that's how far we've come in our own digital journey.
That's very cool. And of those interviews, is there one that's been had the most eyeballs on it, or it's been the most surprisingly engaged from your viewers?
So I'll tell you like just one funny story is I talked to a person that I knew that was a student member of our board and was a resident at one of the key hospitals in New York City that was tremendously hit in the height of the pandemic. And I was listening to him talk, and this is when I was relatively new at this. And so I was kind of into the read the question and just wait for the other person to stop talking and then ask the next question. This is like how bad I was at this. And I didn't really hear him talk about it, but he said that he had just gotten over COVID and that he was back at his job at an emergency room in Queens. And the next day, it turned out that someone from CNN watched that segment, and they didn't miss that. And then I think it was Chris Cuomo interviewed him the next day, and the whole thing was about how he had had COVID and was back on the job 2 weeks later. And I was like, oh, I guess I should start listening. That was my key learning there. So that was one of my favorite interviews, and taught me a lot about moving from interview to conversation, like this.
Totally, 100%. Flucky, have you got a podcast, or is there?
Yeah, so our team's podcast, so we're Disney Movie Insiders. So our podcast is called Disney Movie Insiders Presents. So in our case, we provide behind the scenes information about upcoming series, mostly, and also movies as well. So mostly focusing on movies that are coming out in theaters, but we also support Disney Plus titles. We recently had some one focusing on Moon Knight. If anyone's watched that on Disney Plus, we had a great one with that one. A really funny one that was like a riot was the Proud Family Louder and Prouder podcast. They had a lot of those castmates come together, and it's really lovely to hear not even just only the stories behind making these movies, but to really see that camaraderie behind the scenes of the people coming back together and to talk about something really wonderful that they made together. It's really fun, and I think it's really part of affirming that mandate that we have as a program to bring fans inside, the movie magic, right? So these are conversations you wouldn't hear otherwise. One thing that was exciting for our Oscar support is that we were able to curate a lot of the different podcast episodes we made, and some of them were with nominees and ultimate winners. So that was
very cool.
Really fun.
That's very cool.
I'd say I love working with enthusiast audiences.
Yes.
And I think almost anybody, like it's weird, I've worked on a lot of different brands, almost anybody is an enthusiast about something and a lot of strange things. So to hear you talk about serving that passion, it's so much fun.
Yeah, and it's especially for the people who work truly behind the scenes. Like, we don't just interview actors, we interview costume designers, we interview stylists. So one of the interviews we had was with the award-winning stylist from Cruella, the live-action movie. So if you saw anything like that, you saw it was like amazing costume design work there. So we love being able to spotlight those stories, and we know our audience, they're hardcore fans, so they love hearing about anything they can. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, well, it's time for some questions, some Q&A from the audience. So I'll ask you all to please just have a look for the people in the orange shirt. They've got some mics, those catch mics. Oh, just one catch mic. Okay, so we've got our friend here. What's your name? Mike? Is it really Mike?
Yeah.
Mike with the mic. Okay, cool. So if anyone needs Mike with a question, just let's over there on the right-hand side. If we could keep the questions around digital transformation, customer experience, just the stuff we've shared today, that'll just help us give you the best answers.
Okay, I was just curious if you talk about Bruno at all?
We don't talk about it.
That's great.
We do have a ton of Encanto rewards, though, so definitely sign up if you haven't.
Our kids are obsessed with Encanto. They've watched it so many times.
Hi, so question, Todd, for you. I work in professional associations, and you talked about segmentation and doing that and how important that is, and we do that as well. But you talked about taking it to the next level of interests, not just as I'm a student or I'm a practitioner or that level, but how did you gather all that detailed segmentation on their interests outside of where they are in their education or where they are as a professional?
Yeah, it's a great question, because what I find, and it's repeated every time I've done one of these segmentations, is that age is just a terrible way to segment, because I can have much more in common with you if we have same interest in music or something like that than I would with somebody who's my age. We did it a really blunt way to start with, was just looking at our email subject lines. So we didn't have any fancy kind of segmentation software or anything like that, but we looked at like what was in the subject line, and what was kind of the key component and what people were clicking through on. And just by kind of starting to categorize how we saw the clicks there, we created 3 really blunt segments out of that. And we worked from there then to kind of test the assumptions about it. And we finally went to an outside modeling firm, and they confirmed, yes, your back of the envelope way of figuring it out through content and through what people were clicking on, that works. And they were pretty distinct audiences. And then that goes back to like the digital transformation thing. I didn't set out to like do digital transformation with that, but once we had that kind of clue, then we just kept advancing the model, kind of going forward and becoming more sophisticated with it. And now, of course, with the site itself, there you have more opportunities, especially when people are logged in, to tell what kinds of things they're doing, and to start to observe those segments and direct your marketing based on those.
Thank you.
Just an interesting point there. While we wait for another question to come out, I'm sure there'll be more. Just around segmenting by age, and obviously there's a place for it, but Erica Hawthorne from Bayer Pharmaceuticals talks about people-focused marketing as opposed to age or demographic, and just understanding that things like you mentioned then, like the fact that you are into the same band is going to be a much better way to talk to someone in a certain tone, as opposed to the fact that, like, I know lots of 43-year-old men who are into very different things than what I'm into. I've probably got more in common with, someone in their 20s who's into the sorts of stuff I'm into. So
I think it's funny because I sat with my team yesterday talking about day in the life. And we're talking about, I think targeting is the hardest thing and the most valuable thing that you can do. You shouldn't do anything before you have that nailed down. And the way to do that, it's got to be behavioral or attitudinal in nature, because the best predictor of future behavior is current behavior. And so I learned at my prior role, we would do a survey, and I would just list out like all these different kinds of behavioral things. Like, I have an online betting account. I visit a horse racing website more than once a week. I think daily racing forum news is better than other news, like whatever. And then even through things like SurveyMonkey, we could go in and start to figure out, like, if you didn't have really one of those 3 things that I rattled off, you were never going to be interested in our premium content product. And so the most valuable thing that you could do as a digital marketer is figure out those behavioral and attitudinal markers that will allow you to target your product proposition and your marketing in the future. So I think that's really, really fun and very valuable.
For sure. Falaki?
I just remembered too, as we're talking about not using the phrase digital transformation, in our case we actually called ours a reimagination.
Oh, that's cool.
Very Disney,
Disney way of putting it, actually. But yeah, I totally agree with what you were saying. Like it makes such a difference to really think about targeting and being really intentional and thinking about behavior based. Like, frankly, I have a better, even though we have our very, much vaunted 4-quadrant movies, I do have a better hunch that you're going to watch maybe the next Marvel movie if I know you watched the one right before that and the one right before that. So I definitely think that interest-based is the way to go, for sure.
Yep, cool.
And also just how people might think. Like, for example, parents. If I know a member as a parent, I'm going to be more likely to target them with things like our 0-point activity packs that are themed about a movie, but geared towards kids, like printable craft activities, right? So that's less to do with age and more, but in a way, like parenting and getting involved in those kinds of activities is a behavior and interest as well.
Yep, excellent. Any other questions? I've got one more if there's no more. There was a presentation yesterday on customer experience, and he talked about, measuring whether you're fulfilling that or not. It's basically the gap between the brand promise and the actual experience, and how big that gap is. Does that resonate with you? And do you feel like in your roles you are shrinking that gap?
You go first? Yeah.
Yeah.
In our case, our brand promise is to bring fans closer to the movies than ever before.
Yep.
And our tagline is to get rewarded just for being a fan.
Yep.
So I see what my role and my responsibility is to not simply duplicate the many efforts across the enterprise or things that they could get otherwise, like watching a trailer that they probably saw on YouTube already, right? It's thinking about what are ways that we can uniquely and reward members and get them excited about the movies that they love.
Yep.
So I see any opportunity we have to offer something exclusive is really important. We offer exclusive, but we're also inclusive, if that makes sense. So I want to make sure that all of our fans feel welcome, that they feel appreciated, that they feel like it's a space for them to celebrate their love of the movie. So I'm always looking for ways we can do that, ways we can have cross-line of business partnerships that let us accomplish that. Because as you can imagine, we're seen as one giant brand, not a motley assembly of different business units. So how do we work together and then think from a data perspective, tie everything together from a CRM, like to bring everything together in a CRM to accomplish that. So I see that there's like a twofold promise in our case. There's our internal promise as a CRM solution for our media to make sure that we're providing a unified profile of all these different members. And then I see like the external promise of making sure that our fans truly feel like insiders.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Yeah, I've heard that definition before.
Yep.
And when I was kind of trying to come up with my own, and I do think it captures the gist of what experience is.
Mm-hmm.
I think a long time ago, people used to, when they thought about experience, they thought about Disney, like, oh, I had a great time at the park or whatever. But in this world, like, experience starts at the need and doesn't end after the purchase. And everything that sits in between it and all of those little points in between the decision stages constitute experience. But I don't think that framing is very measurable.
Yeah.
And the one thing that's been interesting about kind of straddling the worlds of customer experience, which I think is poorly marketed and understood. And so I say CX needs a little marketing. Literally, is understanding that the delivery of it results in growth.
Yep.
And if you're in customer experience and if you're in marketing and your job's not to grow, you're in the wrong field.
Spot on. Great. Todd, Falake, thank you so much for your time. Give them a round of applause, please.